When I find myself struggling with anxiety, I've often wondered, how can I have the gift of faith yet struggle with anxiety? Does anxiety mean that I don't trust God? The first memory of anxiety that I have is from 2007, when I was 14 years old. I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was definitely an experience that I wouldn't forget. It started at a conference at another local church. Everything was going okay, and I was enjoying the event. But in the last session of the day, the speaker gave an opportunity for everyone to respond to what they'd heard. It was in that moment that I started to panic, because I realised that I hadn't been listening carefully to what they were saying, and I didn't know what the right response was, and I didn't want to make the wrong one. One thing led to another, and because of large crowds and a number of other things, I remember that I could barely breathe. My thoughts were spiralling out of control, and I couldn't explain what was going on. I could barely speak. I felt completely overwhelmed. I didn't know it then, but that was my first panic attack. For the next 4 months, I felt like I was in a constant state of anxiety. My thoughts were constantly spiraling, thinking all day, every day. I can remember sitting through family dinners and not having any idea what they've talked about when we get to the end. I can remember sitting through a TV show, and when it finished, having no idea what happened. I was disengaged from conversations because I was preoccupied with the constant noise in my head. It felt like all my thoughts came down to this one fear, the fear that every choice I made could be the wrong one. Because I didn't understand it, I didn't really talk to anyone about it. I didn't want them to think I was broken. I didn't think they'd understand. It seemed like the only time that I felt safe or calm was when I spent time with God. Most of the 4 months is a bit of a blur, but there's one night that I really remember. I was sitting there reading my Bible, and I read this verse, Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I can't really explain this moment other than to say it was like a light bulb had just turned on, like it all just suddenly sunk in. Why on earth would I be worrying about tomorrow when I know that God is good, that He's got His eye over everything? In that moment, it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was now able to feel things other than fear and worry and sadness. I was able to be joyful, smile, and have fun again. I truly believe that God healed me in that moment, and I was anxiety-free for the next 4 years. But in 2011, anxiety started to creep back into my life. I experienced some pretty serious burnout in my first year after high school by filling my time with study, work, friends, and ministry. It came back slowly, so I didn't really notice it at first. But then I started to experience more triggers, like people judging the decisions that I was making, feeling like I had to make so many choices, or large crowded places. The first time someone pointed out that I might have anxiety, I told them that they were silly. I ignored them. And to be honest, I felt a little bit judged. But it was about 6 months later when I was meeting with my mentor, recapping a story of a recent panic attack that I had. I didn't know what it was, but thankfully she did. She was able to explain anxiety to me in a way that helped me understand and not feel judged. I continued to meet with my mentor, and she helped me work through a lot of those things. I told my family. It was a bit confusing for them, but my mum was also really helpful. She did lots of research on her own to try and figure out how she could support me. She even found an 8-week counselling workshop that we could do together so that we could understand more about my anxiety. The workshop was really helpful. It helped me understand how my anxiety functions, my triggers, and the steps that I can take when I find myself struggling. As I've learnt more about my anxiety, it's also helped me to understand others a little bit more. The way that they react might just be the way that they keep their anxiety under control. Everyone's different and we react in different ways. So sometimes we might just need to be a little bit more patient or understanding to help others feel more comfortable. What I've realised over time is that my fear is never about trusting God. I deeply know that God is good. What I fear is the experience of hard or painful things, which may hurt me or others. And my role in making those decisions that may lead to those hard or painful things. It's confusing that I still live with anxiety, especially because I have no doubt in my mind that God healed me in that moment in 2007, and I have no doubt that He could heal me again. I found peace knowing that God can heal from mental health situations, but He doesn't always do it in the same way. Sometimes He can remove it completely. Sometimes He can remove it for a season. And other times, He might want us to grow and learn over a long process of maybe months or years. I've come to understand that I might live with anxiety, but it doesn't mean that I don't trust God. Even in the midst of anxiety, I know that God is good.
I would understand that mental health impacts my body. So it's not just something that I can control in my thinking, but it impacts my body. It'd be like saying to someone who had a heart attack, stop having a heart attack, if you said stop being anxious. I've had to learn that, and I wish I'd known that at the start. It would have made it an easier path to walk. When I look back in hindsight now, I realise that ever since I was just a little kid, and we're talking pre-10 years old, that there was some significant problems with my mental health, but I had no idea about that. When it became obvious was closer to when I was in my 40s, and so it would be when it always manifests to start with for me when I would get separated from my kids. But I knew, and my wife Deb knew as well, I knew that it was a bit more than just a dad that really loved his kids. It just felt like it was borderline not healthy, and yet it was always manageable. When it really sort of burst onto the scene and I couldn't ignore it was right at the start of 2012, and Deb's dad had passed away very suddenly and tragically in Canada. And so I went to Canada with the family, and then I was coming back by myself, and it was to lead a mission trip from church and to do some other things, and Deb and the kids were going to follow a few weeks later. And that night, flying from LA to Sydney, I was on a crowded 747, and if you were sitting beside me you wouldn't have known, but it was the most horrific experience of my life, that sense of anxiety and wondering what was going to happen to me. One minute I'd have the sweats, I'd be really, really hot. A few minutes later I'd have the chills and I'd be freezing cold, and I couldn't sleep, I couldn't rest, my body was really agitated. People have asked me, what were you worried? Were you worried about flying? And I'm going, no, I've flown more than I can even remember, that doesn't worry me. Were you worried that something would happen to your kids? No, I wasn't worried about that. You know, I actually found it really hard to know what was troubling me. What I knew was that internally in my head, I felt like I was going to go crazy. I was terrified, thinking, what's going to happen? Am I going to end up rolling around the floor of the aircraft and they've got to restrain me or something? I just didn't know what was going to happen. I felt really sick. So it was the worst experience of my life, bar none. And so after that happened, you know, I knew then that this was a warning sign to me. It was not something that I could ignore. And some of the things that crossed my mind then is, what does this mean? Because, you know, for me, and I know it probably sounds really arrogant to say it, but I'm thinking Jeff Shepherd does not struggle with mental health. Jeff Shepherd does not have a weakness like this. And to me, there was an absolute sense of shame to it. I felt totally ashamed and weak and 100% broken. I arranged to see a psychologist, and I saw him really as soon as I could after I was back in Australia. And in there as well, I went to the doctor, and he's fantastic. And I arranged, when I rung up and got the appointment, I said, can I get a longer appointment than just 10 minutes? I need to be able to explain this. I said, I'll pay extra, but I need to be able to explain the situation. And I mean, I'm going to say it, but I went on to medication, and I was on medication for a couple of years. And that was probably the second or third hardest part of this whole journey for me, with feeling like, so I have to go on medication for anxiety. And for a long time I couldn't even talk about that to anyone. I couldn't even admit it to anyone. And right at the moment, like here we are, it's years down the track, and I'm saying that now. It's hard for me to say it now. But I know that I needed that medication. And apart from that too, just an awesome group of friends. The friends that I've got around me to support me through this, you couldn't equal them. And then I also had some specific prayer ministry. So some people nearby where I live that really specialise in prayer ministry. So that's been an ongoing thing for me as well. So I've tried to do all of those things. Look, my theory is that people really do mean well, but some of the things that I've found really difficult is if people have tried to manage me or tried to tell me what would be helpful to me and what wouldn't be, that hasn't been helpful to me. I've needed all along to be able to make those decisions for myself, and if I felt like I couldn't make a decision, then it's been much more important for me to actually ask for help in making that decision rather than have someone presume and try and make the decision for me. And I think the other thing too that we tend to do with people when they're struggling, we tend to give pat answers, So it'll be things like, someone will say with the best of intention, hey, just keep your eyes on Jesus, Jeff. Just keep your eyes on Jesus, And I'm like, internally I'm thinking, well, I know that. You need to tell me that. The people that have helped me the best are those that have just turned up day in, day out, and cheered me on. And especially in my case, they just gradually and gently pointed me to Jesus. Mental health is not just a mental or a physical or a human journey, it's a spiritual journey as well. And so for me, faith in Jesus was not just a part of this, but it was central to it. There's not 1 milligram of pride in what I'm saying, because I've been so broken through this whole experience. But the other thing is that I know God has made me strong, and to the point where I know that at this stage in my life, I'm stronger than I've ever been, ever. And the other thing is that it's not over yet. There's much more coming. So God has done an incredible work for me in changing me and helping me and healing me. And yet I know there's still a long way to go. But I'm resoundingly, unchangeably confident in what's coming, and that is that bit by bit, God's bringing his healing, and so it's going to get better and better day by day, and I'm really enjoying it.